47 Escape. Captain Black Spider, the enemy's wingman has been shot down, said the early warning aircraft. Very good. Sammy said reluctantly. The plane was accelerating, and he struggled to say a word. In another situation, the enemy's two Su-30s are 85 kilometers away, flying toward here, and they have accelerated to 1,000 kilometers. I suggest you withdraw from the battlefield. The early warning aircraft continued. Understood. Sammy knew that according to the speed of the enemy plane, he would enter the enemy's long-range missile range in half a minute, but he still had time to attack again. The MiG-29 is slowly moving away from him. The Indian pilot was absolutely right to fire two R-27s. Now his plane has a small advantage in the thrust-to-weight ratio, and this advantage is likely to let him slide away. On Raden's HUD, the two twisting thin lines were constantly changing. The colonel tried to stabilize the plane, trying to fit the MiG-29 in front of it. This funnel-shaped aiming mark was different from conventional aiming. Based on radar measurements, no matter how the attitude of the enemy plane changes, as long as the wings of the enemy plane are roughly inserted into the sides of the funnel, the shooting will be sure, but this is a tormenting job, because the enemy plane usually uses very violent maneuvers to get out of sight. As expected, the enemy plane turned from its simple acceleration and began to swing left and right, desperately destroying the aiming. When Sammy pressed the gun button, the MiG fighter plane began to circle to one side, and a string of shells flew to the distant horizon, without a trace. Can hit. The colonel circled closely, but the sighting marks couldn't keep up with the movements of the bandit, which reminded him of the three-pointed canard he was flying when he shot down the Mirage 2000 a few days ago. The instant hovering and acceleration capabilities of that plane were much better than the JF-17. Sammy fired the second time, and the enemy plane did the same trick again, suddenly turning to the other side. This serpentine action to destroy the aiming always worked well. The colonel knew that the pilot of the previous plane was not one. The tendon escaped. He must be constantly looking back and observing, constantly trying to figure out his intentions. Captain Black Spider, I remind you that your fuel level is low. Sammy ignored the warning of the early warning aircraft, and turned off the sound of the aircraft's low fuel level. He knew that the Bibuto International Airport was nearby, so he was not in a hurry. A day ago, Major General Islam warned all pilots to land at civilian airports at will, which may allow the Indian Air Force to find an excuse to attack civilian targets, but Sammy did not take Major General's words to heart at all. In his opinion, India, if you want to mess around, you can always find a reason. The enemy plane was slowly out of range of the cannons, and neither side was able to accelerate. Sammy saw the opportunity and fired the last missile. The enemy plane ran away again with an ugly and sharp turn. This old-fashioned missile is easy to lose when it encounters a real master, which is really worrying. Seeing that the enemy plane fled back to the Indian side, Sammy had no choice but to see him flee. When the colonel turned, two Su-30s that came from a distance were rescued 40 kilometers away, but instead of launching missiles, they turned around and went back. The 31st Lion Squadron has always been known for its prudence. The Indian Air Force has crashed hundreds of fighter jets in 10 years, and this squadron has always had no losses. Their conservative style has been integrated into the tactics. There is no early warning aircraft support, and they dare not go too far. Captain Roll sat in the cabin panting desperately, knowing that his life was back. When he and Bareilly's Lieutenant Goya met for the first time in the corridors of Hindustan State Television a few days ago, they talked about the air battles they had just experienced in different airspaces, and their rambling conversations seemed to intersect. Roll said that after he shot down the F-16 with a long-range missile, a maniac driving a Thunderbolt fighter in the opponent's formation even chased and killed 4 MiG-21s returning to Sarsi, and shot down 2 of them. His words obviously aroused Goya's interest. At that time, Goya guessed intuitively that this was probably the same one as the Thunderbolt that nearly knocked him down. He still remembered that the Thunderbolt's number was 101. 1 minute ago, when Roll's plane was pressing and turning, he kept looking back at the other party. Maybe it's just a squadron internal number, but he knows that Pakistan has only 2 squadrons equipped with such aircraft. Captain Trident, you can follow the plane of 31 Squadron and land at Halwala nearby. If your fuel is low, there is no tanker nearby. The ground base called, pulling Roll back from his thoughts. No, I can fly back to Adam Bull. I must report this fight to the wing captain immediately. They have never used such a tactic before. Captain, this tactic was not invented by them, it should be a revenge for them in this morning. Siachen Glacier damage. Eagles took out 2 of their F-16Cs. Whenever we're in a siege, I wonder where the fuck are our OX. It tells us they have very few planes, but the planes are always showing up from all directions. There were some problems with the ground radar. In the morning, a group of infiltrators blew up the long-range warning radar on the Dawa Heights. Just now they blew up another army search radar with anti-radiation bombs. It's all a farce, and in Roll's view, the Defense Department shouldn't take things too lightly until it decides to fight. Singh promised that it would be as easy to deal with Pakistan as the United States would deal with Iraq, and within a few weeks Pakistan could be subdued with the Air Force alone, but all the adverse conditions turned out like the plot of a third-rate script. Appear. However, the advantages of several AWACS aircraft in the Pakistani Air Force area cannot be restrained so far, and the ground radar system of the Air Force will be destroyed by Muslim militants. Even in times of peace, this should be a heavily defended place. Trident Squadron still has several MiG-29Bs parked by the runway for lack of spare parts. Perhaps the Ministry of Defense believes that this level of combat readiness is enough to win the war on 2 fronts at the same time. Spare parts, if a more powerful country in the northeast were involved in the war, Roll couldn't imagine how things would turn out.